For those of you who don't know, I absolutely love South Park. In fact, it's my favorite cartoon of all time. Whether it's the writing, the characters, the humor, or the other things that make it great, I come back to it every year, and I've never gotten bored from it. Matt Stone and Trey Parker really made a wonderful show, and I think that everyone should check it out when they can, because it will be worth it. But believe me or not every show gets its start as its own show. Some begin on other TV programs, such as The Simpsons being part of the Tracy Ullman Show, or they start as something almost completely different from the final show, but still somehow foreshadows it in some way, such as Family Guy starting out as Larry and Steve. South Park is no different and falls more into Family Guy's category, but instead its beginnings were extremely similar to what the show would become. But there are still some varying differences to the show and its beginnings. Those beginnings being the two shorts, The Spirit of Christmas, Jesus vs. Frosty, and The Spirit of Christmas, Jesus vs. Santa. I've decided to look at and review both of these shorts to see how they stack up to South Park as it is now, and if Matt Stone and Trey Parker have improved since they've made those shorts, while also providing some interesting information about them. But without further ado, let's get into things.
I keep hearing this melody in my ear. Right here.
In 1992, Matt Stone, Trey Parker, and a couple of University of Colorado students came together under the Avenging Conscious Films label to create a small 4-minute short called The Spirit of Christmas, Jesus vs. Frosty. Parker and Stone animated the film using construction paper, glue, and an old 8mm film camera, and also did the voice acting for most of the characters in this short. The film premiered at the December 1992 student film screening and is about 4 mostly nameless boys making a snowman that turns evil and starts destroying everything in sight until the boys find Jesus, who defeats the snowman, and at the end of the short the boys realize that the true meaning of Christmas is about getting presents. It features some of the ingredients that would later become staples in the South Park franchise, and most of Stone and Parker's works, such as the Stilly story, the paper cutout stop-motion animation, bad language, graphic violence, and a preachy as hell moral at the end. The 4 main kids in this story are also very similar to the 4 main characters in South Park, or at least most of their designs are. You'll see what I mean in a bit. This kid here, in the orange hoodie, is very obviously supposed to be Kenny. This fat kid here is definitely Cartman, except some of the colours are a bit different. This kid here is pretty different to Stan, but the overall shape of his body is basically the same, leaving only this kid in the yellow cap to be Kyle, who has the most different design from his final counterpart, but you can still tell that it's an early version of him based on his voice and mannerisms. There is one contradiction to this rule, however, and that is the fact that when Cartman dies, he's referred to as Kenny. Yeah, that's a bit confusing as to how or why that happened, because Kenny is based on a friend that Trey Parker had, who was poor, wore a very similar hoodie, and had the same name. I think maybe this wasn't part of the plan for this short, and they animated Cartman's death in the wrong part of the film. And I assume they must have had a strict deadline to get it out, so they didn't have time to reanimate it to be Kenny. But that's just my 2 cents here. The funniest thing about this, however, is that Carmen is the only character, apart from Jesus and Frosty, who has no lines. But Kenny does have 1 line at the start of the film. I don't know what you could do with that information, but I hope it was interesting. Another interesting thing about this short is that Matt and Trey forgot to credit themselves while making this film. So, at the time, nobody really knew who had made it. When it got popular, one of their friends showed it to them, stating that it was very funny and worth checking out, only for them to realize that their friend unknowingly showed them something they created. But enough of the details about this film. Is it any good? Well, I do think the idea of an evil Frosty that destroys everything is pretty cool, and they did a pretty good job of conveying the threat of this evil snowman. Until Jesus comes along and kills it with one throw of his halo. I think that the show proper should come back to this idea at some point, because I think they could do something really great with it. I know the episode Banned in China was about not needing to reuse old ideas just to appeal to fans, but I think they should make an exception here. The writing itself isn't really anything too special in my opinion. Like I said, it does hit some of the same cues as South Park does, but not as well. Although there were some parts I found pretty funny, such as one of the kids saying, "You can't say fuck in front of Jesus." But humor is subjective, so just take my opinion with a grain of salt. I should also state that I don't like the message at the end. I'm not saying I dislike it because it's bad. I know it's supposed to be a joke. But what I mean is that it comes completely out of nowhere and has nothing to do with the short itself. Say what you will about most South Park episodes coming off as preachy, but the messages there at least had something to do with what happened in the episode. Here, however, there's no mention of presents in this short, and it just comes right out of the blue. I could talk about the voice acting being pretty bad, but honestly, for 2 inexperienced guys in their early 20s, it's pretty good. Yeah, the voices are a bit nasally and irritating, but remember that in the first season of The Simpsons, the voice actors weren't the best either, and that was on primetime television. Do you really think a student film would fare any better? Which is something I'll also say about the animation. Yeah, by more professional standards, it's dog shit. But again, Matt and Trey weren't very experienced while making this short, and they were using a camera that, even at the time, was pretty old. So, much like the voice acting, you need to forgive the animation a little. So, what are my thoughts on Jesus vs. Frosty? Yeah, it's okay. Although I can forgive the bad voice acting and not so great animation, and I do really like the idea of this short, the writing and comedy don't really make up for it in my opinion. The writing does have a consistent flow, but it can feel a bit bland throughout the film, and I only got a chuckle from a couple of scenes. However, despite my gripes with it, I still recommend checking it out if you're a diehard South Park fan who's interested in where it got its start. Mainly because I think it's important to really see how much Matt and Trey improved from this short. And I know I've already said this before, but I love the evil Frosty idea, and seeing something like that implemented in a new episode just with better writing and comedy would be awesome. Maybe having it be the final episode of the show would be great poetry for this show. But it has been referenced in the season 6 episode Simpsons Already Did It, where the boys are building a snowman and Tweak refuses to put a carrot on his head because he's afraid it'll come to life and kill everyone, much like the snowman in this short. But Stan tells him that it's never happened before except for that one time. So does this mean that Jesus vs. Frosty is canon to South Park? Probably not, but it's fun to speculate. After Jesus vs. Frosty became very popular, Matt and Trey were given $2,000 by Brian Graydon, an executive from the Fox Broadcasting Company, to make another animated short as a video Christmas card that he could send to his friends. So in 1995, with a budget of $750, the duo made Jesus vs. Santa. Here, things became a lot more like South Park than their previous work. All the main four boys have more finalized designs, were finally given their proper names. Kyle was stated to be Jewish, and Kenny would get eaten by rats after dying. So, in this short, Jesus descends onto Earth, looking for a certain someone. On his way, Jesus finds four young boys, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, as they're singing Christmas carols. The boys join Jesus on his search to find Santa, as he's asking kids what they want for Christmas. The two then get into a fight, which is then broken up by the boys, who tell them that Christmas should be about loving each other, regardless of how we all view it. This leads to Jesus and Santa making up and getting drinks, and the boys learning that the true meaning of Christmas is presents. I should also state that Brian Boitano makes an appearance in this, similar to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, but here he has a speaking. This movie was actually shown to the real-life Brian Boitano, who was pretty happy with their depiction of him as the guy who gives advice to kids and helps them grow stronger because of it. It's also rumored that George Clooney was one of the people Brian Graydon showed the film to. So this must have been the starting point of his friendship with Matt and Trey, and his contribution to the existence of South Park. It also won a Los Angeles Film Critics Association Award in 1997 for Best Animated Short, got a DVD release on South Park The Hits Volume 1 as a special feature, and the making of the film got parodied in the Season 4 episode of Very Crappy Christmas. So, with such critical acclaim like that, the short must be something great, right? Well, I think it's far better than Jesus vs. Frosty. Again, the idea of Jesus vs. Santa is a fun concept that I'd like the show to do again. Come on, something like that would be perfect for a modern South Park episode. Although they did kind of do that in Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, but I mean something more specific to that concept. The writing is better than Jesus vs. Frosty, and like I said, a bit closer to the writing South Park would eventually adopt. It's way more vulgar, the jokes are way funnier, and the chemistry between the main four boys and their personalities are defined more clearly. I also really like the reasons why both Jesus and Santa fight. Jesus' reasoning is that he feels as if Santa's overshadowed the fact that Christmas is his birthday, and Santa's being that Christmas should be about giving. I'm not anti-Christian or anything, but it really leans in on how Jesus' perspective is more selfish and flawed than Santa's, which goes to show that the Jesus worshipping side of Christmas can be just as bad as the one worshipping Santa, and I think that's really awesome. I'm also a fan of the message this time around. No, not the Christmas is about presents message. Again, that had nothing to do with the film. Although, I do like how that led to the boys all deciding to become Jewish after learning Hebrew people will get presents for 8 days. Actually, scratch what I've just said about the message. It can stay. But the message I actually wanted to talk about is the one about how the meaning of Christmas isn't about fighting over which side of it is better, but it should be about having fun and hanging out with all your loved ones despite your differences. I think that can really say a lot to someone who might have different views on Christmas than other members of their family or friend groups. The voice acting, although still not perfect, is a good improvement over Jesus vs. Frosty. The voices of the main four boys are a little more in line with what their voices would be like in the future, and I think they got the voices of Jesus and Santa down very well. Also, Brian Boitano's not too bad either. And the animation is pretty good as well. Not as good as even the older South Park episodes. It still has its problems. But for a short animated film by two guys who are still pretty young and inexperienced at the time, the animation is great, and I like seeing how it improved from Jesus vs. Frosty. Here, everyone's designs are basically finalized and ready to go for when South Park becomes an actual show. Although, Wendy's isn't quite finished, but it's pretty minor when you consider the fact that she's only really making a cameo appearance and has no speaking lines at all. One thing I do find interesting about the animation is that it has a statue that looks very similar to the fake superhero in the film Orgasmo, which is funny because Jesus vs. Santa actually came out 2 years before Orgasmo. So, was this film foreshadowing not just the creation of South Park, but also Orgasmo? Now that's pretty awesome. So, I've looked at and reviewed both of the Spirit of Christmas shorts, and my opinion on them should be pretty obvious. Although they're not the greatest, most well-written, or even funniest things Matt Stone and Trey Parker have made, I still find a sort of charm in these shorts. This is mainly because they were amateur filmmakers at the time, much like most of us are now, and I find something like that very cool. After the Spirit of Christmas shorts, Matt and Trey went on to bigger and better things. Now, they've made 5 hilarious movies, a Broadway musical that's still airing to this day, and one of the most influential and iconic cartoons ever. Shows us that as long as we have the passion, motivation, and strength to make the kind of shows or movies that we think the world will love, we can do it. And we don't have to wait until we've got enough money or even a good enough health to do it. As a kid, I've always envisioned myself making my own show and being a recognizable figure on YouTube, and to see people as big as Matt Stone and Trey Parker have started in the same place as me really makes my passion for this stuff grow. So maybe in terms of quality, the Spirit of Christmas shorts aren't quite my favorites. I still find them to be interesting, and they give me a lot of hope for my future, not just on YouTube, but in general. And you guys can do this too. All you gotta do is have an idea and bring it to life in any way you can.